This video that you're about to watch was really difficult for me to record because I've been in a period of depression that's made it incredibly difficult to speak. I've been getting into conversations with people and then having to give up speaking mid-sentence because I either just forget, I'm just forgetting things constantly right now, or I just lose motivation to finish the thought. I'm having to try really hard to put on this farce to speak into this camera right now, and I've done this like multiple times, so I'm very energized because every time I keep messing up and then having to turn the thing off and then having to go back and then redo. But I will just lose motivation mid-sentence. I literally can't finish thoughts right now. And my brain is going so slow that anything that I would normally enjoy outside of watching movies or anime, completely unable to enjoy. Completely unable to motivate myself to do it past, like, the very beginning of starting it, and then I can't finish. That's why there haven't been any videos. I haven't had the motivation to come up with ideas. I haven't had the motivation to consume media that would otherwise allow me to come up with ideas. I haven't had the motivation to talk. I haven't had the interest in talking. I have not been able to enjoy any of the things that I would otherwise normally enjoy outside of just sitting down and being a consumer. And so I'm sorry there's been less videos recently, but I've just wanted to kill myself. By the way, YouTube has been deleting comments off of my videos constantly, so if you left a comment on the last video that I made, I'm sorry I wasn't able to reply to it. I was thinking about how alone I feel on a day-to-day basis as I was cooking breakfast this morning, and it made me think about something I said in the Diesel video. For those of you who got through that one at like the midsection, I have this big pad of paper and I'm talking about how my entire life it's felt like I'm always in a circle, that I'm inside of a circle and that everyone is surrounding me outside of the circle, and no one can really understand what it's like being in the circle. You're just stuck in the circle, completely isolated, feeling alone. Even though there are tons of people around you, they have no ability to relate to what it's like to be in the circle, and so it appears more as if they're crowding around you than spending time with you. And that's more or less how I've felt my whole life. The only difference now being that I am able to take refuge from feeling chronically alone when I'm with certain people, that I can just get immersed into the act of socializing with someone. It's a small amount of people, but those people do exist, and it makes me feel more like a human being than a lonely automaton walking through the wasteland or whatever. I used to have to drink alcohol or take benzodiazepines or something like that just to be able to feel like that, just to be able to feel like I was a human being who could interact with other people. Or stimulants like Adderall would also provide a similar effect, because when I would take them, all of my anxiety would be removed and I would just become completely immersed into what I was saying. And so maybe it was like I was alone, that I consciously felt alone, or subconsciously, but I was completely okay with it because I was just enjoying the moment so much, ranting about whatever I was ranting about, being so immersed in the act of doing the thing that the implications of how you're seen by other people don't really come up. But with alcohol and downers like that, it's more like your ability to process that level of abstraction as it pertains to other people just isn't there. You just do a thing. It's not as if you can't think, but you're thinking on a lower level. Downers are not very thinky drugs. They're meant to slow you down. And that act of slowing me down would make it easier to socialize because I wasn't considering the implications of those things. I wasn't feeling as directly alone as I would sober. Whereas perhaps with stimulants I felt alone, I just didn't care because they felt so good, and I would become immersed in the act of doing what I was doing. I find these different neurochemical kind of changes interesting, the psychological effects and whatnot. The thing about that video that I brought up is that its ultimate conclusion is much more dark than the conclusion that I have now. Because maybe you could chop this up to me having some people who I feel comfortable around, and then that making my overall feelings on life less depressing and shaky. And that would be fair, that I'm in a privileged position now as compared to before, and that allows me to take a stance like this that's for many people easier said than done. But I would also argue that much of the time there are situations in which I would like to be understood, in situations in which I would otherwise like to feel less alone, that I simply don't care in now. And again, you could say, well, once you have that, you ought to be fine. But I don't think I even really have that right now. I think the highest level of understanding that I can get to with another person is like 65%. Like 65%. It can't go any further than that. Because my experiences and the upbringing I had are just so fundamentally different than anyone I've ever met. I've never met someone with the kind of upbringing that I had, and the kind of experiences that I had, all compiling onto one another. But I have had so many people tell me that I'm the strongest person they've ever met because I've been through horrifying things that they literally could not imagine before I said them. One after another in a sequence that would seem as if it came out of a movie. But because it's so unique, you wouldn't expect someone to make a movie like that. It's one of those things where when you're at that level of difference with other people, just in the experiences you've had, not in like who you are or how you think, just in experiences. You have a bunch of experiences that compounded onto one another that other people cannot relate to. You're never going to be able to get to the level of understanding that other people will be able to. Other people will generally have similar experiences to one another, or at least they'll find a group of people that have similar experiences to them if they're in the minority. I cannot even find that in minority communities. But that's okay, because I've found that 65%, and that's enough. I have people who, in some ways, I'm even closer with who don't even reach that level of percent. It's okay. There's nothing wrong with it. You don't need people to understand you. You don't. You just ought to exist. If you can exist and be happy and do the things that otherwise make you happy or get you through life, that's all you need. You don't need anybody else to validate that or to tell you that you can do that. The only person who should decide whether you should do that is you. You don't need approval from anybody else. Logically, I've always known this, but it's taken drilling it into my own head for long enough, and I guess a long enough time of being alive and having to deal with this need for recognition or a need to be less alone, understanding, etc., that I've finally come to terms with it. Or at least come to terms with it in a way that's more quantifiable than before. In a way that on a day-to-day level, it doesn't bother me. You could say, well, maybe it comes back. And maybe it will come back. Maybe it'll be worse at certain moments than it was at other moments. When we're talking in terms of the day-to-day living experience, I felt better about it now than I ever have, even though I'm incredibly depressed all the time. I've just accepted that I'm going to feel alone in a lot of interactions, that I'm never going to be able to communicate myself in a way that's close to 80 or 90%, because people just don't relate to a person like me. There shouldn't be anything wrong with that. There should always be things that you enjoy, not in spite of that, but you just enjoy them. There shouldn't be something that you're battling against, that you've decided is your undertaking in the war against the world, this mass ocean that you're continually fighting. Shouldn't matter. You ought to just do what you like doing. I think coming to acceptance here is the most important thing. If you can accept a lot of these brain cops in your head telling you that you ought to be one way or another, or telling you that you have to adhere to some socially defined understanding of goodness, then you can be liberated from them, and you can do what you've always wanted to do on instinct. Being alone and experiencing loneliness don't even necessarily have to be the same thing. When I hear people describe the malaise and the depression associated with loneliness, again, I often look to experiences I've had being surrounded by other people, but those experiences don't necessarily correlate to experiences that I've had in my room, doing something that I'm deeply invested in, doing something that I enjoy when I'm not in a period of depression where I can't enjoy anything, of course. And so, well, I mean, even when I'm in periods of depression like that, I can still watch movies and anime just fine. So it's really more laborious tasks, things that require more of my mental faculties to be up to date, that I can't enjoy. But you know, anime and movies, there's always room in the good old head for that. But you get the picture. When people describe the experience of loneliness, this, you know, immense depression and dissatisfaction with being by themselves, I've associated that pretty commonly with being around other people because of that barrier in understanding, because of that inability to communicate. But I look at myself now, and I say, yes, it is okay to be alone in the face of other people. And as a result of that acceptance towards being alone in the face of other people, I have inversely removed all of my loneliness. This I think I have become confident to the point of being a huge fucking asshole. So I just got done, at least I think I'm done, with basically a comment exchange with a friend of mine who I likely will contact when I have enough of a life to actually use Discord again, because currently I'm just in my room all the time and I don't have a life right now, and typically the kind of people who get way too enveloped into Discord don't have a life. And so in order to solve my unintentional, undiagnosed ADHD, the only way I can do that is by getting a life, by having a stable, meaningful hobby, which I already have, which is YouTube, and having a stable, meaningful career of some kind, and or, you know, relationship. Maybe that happens. A stable, meaningful career, and like living in a place, probably Italy. I think I've gotten to the point, and I'm probably going to change my mind about this in a few months, but I think I've gotten to the point where, like, I actually do want to live in Italy. I don't know how I would do that. I'm probably going to end up living in, like, Spain or something, because I think after I transition and after my channel gets more subscribers, more of an international audience, I will just meet someone from the internet and be like, do you want to do a sham marriage, you know? Do you want to do a sham marriage so I can get citizenship into Spain or Ukraine or wherever it is that I would have the ability to go to by getting married. I think if someone liked my videos enough, they would probably be down to do that. If you know enough about one another, it's not a difficult law to break, I don't think. How the fuck would they prove that it's a scam marriage, you know? They wouldn't be able to. So I'm thinking of just getting to a point where I would be able to meet someone who likes my videos enough to be willing to do that. I don't think it would be that difficult if my audience grew enough. When I get to a point where I'm in Europe, I think I would be able to not get as enveloped into Discord as I do now, because addiction ultimately is tied to environment. We know that when the people who were using heroin in Vietnam, for example, really heavily, when they got home, the vast majority of them didn't have a problem with heroin anymore, because the reason they were using it was because they were in a traumatic war environment. And there's tons and tons of examples you can give of people who are in poverty who become addicted, and then when they get out of poverty, they're not addicted anymore. Even people, well, there's not as many of these because they're just sort of like, you know, people who tend to want to use drugs recreationally continually are just more rare. But you can find examples of people who continue using them on and off after being addicted previously, when they get out of whatever life situation that they're in, or poverty. I've seen less examples of people getting out of poverty and then getting out of addiction and still continuing to use, but there have been plenty of people who were just in a bad life situation and then continued using as they got out of that situation and were out of that situation and no longer had a problem anymore. So largely, if we're going on anecdotal reports and just the statistics and the data and the evaluations we can make from such data, addiction is primarily tied to environment, and it's also a matter of self-control and the parameters of your personality, etc. I think many people have struggled with at one point in their life with some kind of addiction or another. In general, when it comes to actually things that are psychoactive, I don't have too much of a problem with it. I don't have too much of a problem with controlling that and being able to monitor my intake, because that's what I've been doing for now a decent number of years and have been pretty decently successful at it. For some reason, it's always just seemed like the logical choice. But I think because Discord doesn't have really any far-reaching implications for your physical health and your financial state, and in some ways can actually be beneficial to your financial state, it's much easier to let get out of control, because it's just an internet website, you know? It doesn't really appear to be that big of a deal in the moment. You can let it get out of control. That's been like the one vice that I've consistently let just get insane. Probably not nearly as insane as some other people, but in my estimation as a generally pretty cautious person who likes to monitor how I do things and consider the ramifications of each thing that I do, I consider that to be a bit wild, how much I've used it. I'm just in my room. Being in my room is mainly what I do every day and has been mainly what I do my whole life. The only way you can really get out of a situation where you're around Discord a lot is to not be in the situation where you're around Discord a lot, to have other things fill up your time to where by the time you actually get around to using it, you don't have the energy to use it. I mean, that was kind of what was going on with me when I was in school, where in the brief portion of time where I was in school and I was still actively deciding to use the platform, I rarely had the energy to actually open up the client and do anything with it, because I expended all of my energy in school. If I'm expending, more of my energy at work or with I'm with whoever that is, and I'm expending less of my energy online because I have less energy for it. Whereas when you're just in your room, you kind of have the energy to do anything. You're set within the parameters of that room. And so the situation becomes it becomes quite different. And so that's why I choose to not use it, is because arguments and sort of just like the decorum of people being dicks becomes a much more serious thing when that's like the only thing you're doing. It's a lot easier to get pissed off when the people you're interacting with is like mainly what you're doing. So because of that pattern of overusing something, that in general being around people is a hugely taxing act for me to do. I gain energy from being alone. I'm an introvert. So being around other people makes me expend a lot of energy. And when you're doing that online, it doesn't really feel like a productive task. It doesn't feel like you're doing anything particularly real. It just feels like you're expending energy endlessly at something that doesn't really exist. There's a certain meaninglessness to it, a certain nihilism that regular interactions on Discord online tend to have. That isn't to say that, we aren't all connected in the lane sense, or that all interactions you have are necessarily going to be marred by that disconnect that the internet has. I think in some ways internet interactions can be more authentic in the sense that you find people who you connect with more, but imagine connecting with those people in the meet space. What would that be like? There is some ways where you can also express yourself in a way that's more true to the way that you view yourself, because ultimately identity is just the the continual accumulation of how you would view yourself. And these ideas that come up over time based on the consistencies that you've observed, that you're able to have a more malleable presentation on the internet. So as a result of that more malleable presentation of yourself, that ability to more greatly customize how you're presented, you can feel more authentic online. I've certainly felt way more authentic online because, as some of you might know, my physical presence and the sound of my voice and certain aspects of my general decorum often do not line up with the way that I see myself internally. Sometimes they really do, and I like it when I'm able to project that without even really trying. Like, I think the sort of emotional suppression that I've done has become such a huge aspect of my life that the mask sometimes feels like it's taken over. That's become the autopilot that I've lived through. Other times, the mask appears completely non-existent, and I don't even notice it. And then other people notice it, you know? Other people notice that I'm being incredibly trans online, and I don't even know. I have no idea. So, you know, the identity in the post-meat space world is a very malleable thing, and if you want to present yourself online through the way your text is, and the way that you customize your online avatar, etc., that is possible. If you're in a period of your life, like me, where there are large aspects of yourself that you would like to transition into something else, that would more accurately reflect who you feel that you are, then being online can provide a great sense of comfort, because in that space it can appear as if to people that you are reflective of those traits more so than you may appear physically. That's a great thing. But again, it comes with drawbacks. Like I said, like, there is often a general disconnect that you will feel from not having the very real physicality of interactions. And so it's all about weighing the positives and negatives. In my case, because I spend so much time alone, to where the computer screen is my primary interaction with the world, the way that I interface with things, it's very easy for me to get entirely caught up in that one-way transaction between other people, where, you know, I start thinking, like, these interactions would be so much better if I just experienced them in person. And again, like, sometimes text on a screen can be this really euphoric thing, especially when you're talking to someone who really means something to you. But I think there's a point in your life when the internet means more, because you can't have those interactions physically, and because you aren't the person who you necessarily want to be yet. I think for some people, the internet is just the only place they can be the person who they want to be for their entire life. I think someone like No Thank You is a good example of this, where, you know, he'll not physically interact with people on a regular basis. He has like one friend IRL, and they don't really see each other very much. When I look at the art he does and the way that he communicates online, it's all marred by this practiced sort of abstract character each time, and it's always different. There's a lot of contradictions in the way that he presents himself, but it's trying to communicate to you something deeper than what the text itself is. And the contradictions are kind of the point of it. And when you start considering, like, the fact that this is attempting to communicate to you something beyond words, beyond the mere consistencies by which people would typically communicate themselves through, you start getting the sense that the internet is being used as a medium for several identities here, and that the several identities are what makes it more authentic, because the person he is cannot simply be contained by one. And in the real world, you're often constrained to just one. That human communication must be limited because you must dumb yourself down to a certain extent. I just so happen to be the kind of person who is simple-minded enough to be mostly dumbed down in what my approach to identity is. It's only because I've been on the internet so long and have had so much emotional suppression that I have to come to these highly abstracted conclusions that I communicate to you. It's not because I'm intrinsically more complicated per se. It's more so because of the circumstances that I'm coming from, and I'm now decoding all of that stuff only to get to the conclusion that I am quite simple in my approach at my baseline. And knowing that makes me really comfortable. You know, being able to be that makes me really comfortable. And I'm being that more and more every day. And I think that's a fairly natural way that human beings are. He's not a particularly natural person. And so I think for someone like him, his approach to the internet makes perfect sense, because it's just where he belongs. I would have said the same thing at one point, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the reason I would have said that was because of the kind of emotional suppression that I've been talking about. I think a lot of people on the internet would feel the same way. It's something that you interface with like this because you're at a time in your life when that makes sense, you know? And eventually that time passes. And so what I'm getting to with all of this is that I was going to talk about how I was like becoming an asshole. I actually forgot the point I was going to make because I started going on this long identity rant. But I'm starting to just have no fucks given when it comes to when I feel like people are out of line, or when I feel like people are just being ridiculous. I will just say the most like bare bone, or not bare bones. I'm kind of being over dramatic at this point. I will just say exactly what my stance is. And I'll tell you, like, I'm becoming such a straight shooter that it sounds like I'm aggressive when I'm not being aggressive. That's the thing, is that, like, I'm not angry when I say any of the things that I say, but I appear like I am to people because I'm just that much of a straight shooter. And I think it's because a lot of the stuff I've said in the past has been so, like, marred in this like Pete Buttigieg-esque flowery language of trying to coat the things you say with 5 different layers of of adulteration in order to not offend the sensibilities of the people who you're listening to it, while at the same time I've been a rambunctious YouTube character who is offending everyone with my presentation, which is ultimately a product of the third-person view by which I've viewed myself and the entire world around me for a large portion of my life. That doing so, being disconnected from the identity of the things I say would allow me to do such a thing. At the same time, when it comes to a lot of my personal relationships, I've taken this very, like, peacemaking, attitude towards the things that I'm saying, where I'm trying to reduce harm as much as I can, and while doing that, losing some of the genuinity behind the things that I'm saying, but doing so often to the point where it feels like that's more authentic than what I really think. And that's a greatly harmful thing, because it causes the kind of emotional suppression that leads to the kind of anger outbursts that I've talked about in the past, which is a deeply unhealthy thing. And as I've allowed myself to just not give a shit, and I think coming out certainly helped with that, as I've allowed myself to just not give a shit and just say exactly what I think, there's no hint of anger to anything I say anymore. It's all complete, it's just a straight shot, you know? And I think that's pretty cool. It feels like I'm having character development in real time every single day. Looky here, you. This is the new Steam page. I really don't know why they're doing it like this. Like, okay. I remember recording all of these videos where I'm just like staring at Steam with my phone on my laptop and then just talking into it aimlessly about nonsense. And I really liked those laptop videos. I really liked the feeling of just sitting down, pointing the camera at a random thing in your lap, and then just going. Because it's the most human and raw expression of this lifestyle that you could possibly show. You know, what is Denpa other than being disconnected from other people and the world around you? And what is the most disconnected thing you could do in a YouTube video? It's break all conventions of what normally a YouTube video would be. And so what I did in so many of these videos, and this was influenced by No Thank You quite heavily, was I just filmed random stuff that, like, most people would sit there and think, okay, this is absolutely not how you should make a video, but I did it anyway. And I tried to think, under these specific conventions, how can I make this video interesting? How does the content that I'm producing, like, in my speech, match up to the content that's being shown visually? And I ended up focusing more on the conversational part of it. But at the same time, like, I think there is value to having videos that are just that plain, because I think for a lot of Denpa out there, for a lot of Needs Hikikomori, any of these strata of online denizens who feel alienated from the rest of the world, they want to find something that resonates with them. I mean, I think this is why so many of us go to, like, R9K, is because when we read R9K, we see other people who are similar, and it feels kind of vindicating, almost, to listen to people who have a similar story, to know that you're not alone in the world. I mean, that was kind of how I got my start on YouTube, was watching creators who had similar interests to me, similar mindsets to me, and then following in their footsteps, because now I wanted to share the feeling that I got from watching their videos with other people. So I liked that. And I liked the act of making things. So I think what Denpa Tube, and just what Denpa itself is about, on the contemporary internet space, places like YouTube, places like here, image boards and other means of communicating with one another on the internet, Denpa content more specifically, is about creating something that resonates. It's about creating something that in its very, you know, in its very core, in like what it's made out of, in what it's in the way that it's filmed, in the way that the ideas are being expressed, and the ideas that are being expressed, trying to have those things all coalesce with one another, come together in a way that connects with people who are of a similar mindset, you know. And so I like to think about all these little things, because when I make the video, I don't really think about those things. I just do them, but afterwards, when it's released, I start thinking about, what does this mean? Why is it that, all of us on here, no thank you, Red, HMR, Eggy, go back as far as Hiki-chan, why is it that this strata of people on the internet have content styles that mirror one another, that have a lot of the same things going on? Obviously there's differences, but the general attitude, like the same philosophy is there in most cases. Why is that? And I start thinking about these things, and it's really interesting to me. And so, you can take something as simple as, like, I'm just going to film my screen here, take out my phone and start talking into it, and then end up finding all these other little ideas that are entrenched within it. I've always thought stuff like that was really cool. But I think it's some of the most comfy content, because it is just literally like a guy right there, being as raw and genuine as they can be. But that genuinity in and of itself isn't the thing that you're coming to the video for. It's part of it, it's a big part of it. But, what if you have, like, let's say like a 60-year-old mom or something making a video that's in the same style, that's the most genuine. Like I look around at obscure YouTube channels a lot, and one of the channels I found by total accident, just by like going through comment sections and looking at people's channels trying to find things, was this YouTube channel called Lisa Howard. And it's like this 50-year-old woman. She's really old, and she's just sitting there in the YouTube sense, at least. We don't have very many older people making videos, so that's my point. But she's just sitting there on her tablet, talking into it about random stuff. Like, the video titles are completely incoherent, they don't make any sense. She has all of these weird series that, like, I would look at and I would go, this makes no sense on YouTube whatsoever, because I watch YouTube, and I analyze the patterns. I grew up on that stuff. And so seeing this, like, older person come on there and then making, like, this very, very raw, to the bone kind of content just about, being an old woman, I don't find particularly interesting. I do have some things like that I do think are pretty cool, from people with just completely different backgrounds and ideas, and it allows me to understand them better. But by and large, like, I'm not going to come to, a really like normie old person's YouTube channel who's making the most raw, quote unquote, most genuine content. Whereas if I look at someone who's clearly an image board user, someone who's just weird, has kind of idiosyncratic Denpa-esque beliefs and a way of life, and I look at their channel and I'm looking at them do this most raw, genuine expression of YouTube, it's more cathartic, because in the other case, you look at this person who's producing these videos who's like a complete normie, and you just think they're dumb, It's like, if you're going to be a complete normie, then try to make your videos creative at least. Try to do something with that. You end up looking at them and thinking, oh, well, they're just being incompetent. That's why their videos are like this. And that can be kind of interesting for like 5 minutes, but after you go off of it, it's not really impactful. But when you find people who are in that strata of people who are very, very weird, who are on the outliers of society, someone like Johnny Alpha Seed, I like his videos, because when I watch this guy who's like homeless, in a tent, just talking about the way that he lives his life, posting a video of like a DXM trip or something, I think that's really cool, because this is a unique way of life that we don't often get the perspective on. Watching someone like Zabu Jard or Mr. Daggers, like Mr. Daggers, he'll produce like an hour video of him basically just dissociating from everything around him, rambling on about stuff that oftentimes doesn't even make sense. But he's from that image board, Denpa strata, even though his videos in many ways aren't really comparable to like mine or Zabujar's. They nonetheless fall into that category. They have the similar rawness of, him just picking around the stuff in his room and throwing all this random stuff around in this broken down room tour that he's doing before he moves. He has a random clip in there of him laying down on his old bed and getting stabbed by the metal prongs that are coming out of it because the bed is breaking down. Little details like that aren't intended but are there nonetheless. Like, they aren't always done for a reason, they just are. They just are there. And I think that kind of rawness, that kind of genuinity is far more interesting with people who are on the outliers of society, or who are Denpa. And so, when I look at Denpa Tube now, and I look at what it represents, this sort of new trend, this new tendency in content creation, that's attempting to genuinely and genuinely down to using KindMaster and stuff, using the most bare bones equipment that you just have in your garage, conveying an idea, conveying who you are in the most raw possible way. I think it only adds to the Denpa element of it, because not only are the things that you're saying Denpa, it's also the content that's produced as Denpa, the way it's produced as Denpa. Other people wouldn't do it that way, and it creates this synergy of elements together that produces a really great synthesis that I think is pretty beautiful. So this is my favorite thing to make and watch. So all of my favorite YouTube content is like this. Part of me feels a little bit weird for taking Hiki-chan off the 3x3, because in a way she still belongs there, but in another way I like that other guy's videos more. Things to ponder today.